This has to do with Palestinian investment and investors in Palestine. Mr. Dana is a consultant at the Palestinian Policy Network al-Shabaka, and he's assistant professor of political science at Hebrew University and master's program at Birzeit University. He finished his postdoctoral studies at Geneva Graduate Institution for International Developmental Studies. The subject of his intervention will be the Palestinian capitalists that have with its impact on the Palestinian policies and politicians. Good afternoon, everyone. All of us, we have witnessed in the Palestinian territories an increasing impact on all walks of life by influential capitalists in the recent years. My paper focuses or deals with this influence. The first one is the impact on the policies of the PA, lobbying these policies and the formulation of policies that suit the interests of that group. The second thing is the social impact on as how certain social controls are imposed on the Palestinian society, restraining it. And the third thing is the direct economic cooperation that we call it normalization between the Palestinian and Israeli capitals in great projects, economic projects in the West Bank and Gaza, in the West Bank, a matter that enables the Israeli colonialism in the West Bank. But before we go into the recent years, all of us, we know that the capitalists in the Palestinian politics, especially within the PLO, has been since the establishment of the PLO, and they were in leading positions, especially in the Palestinian National Council, and these capitalists played different roles during the 60s and 70s. And this presence was allowed by the position of some factions, especially Fatah, that consider them as national bourgeois, and they constituted an integral part of the Palestinian national liberation as per the Fatah movement. Of the roles they played, beside taking leading positions in the PLO, they provided funding or the political mediation, such as between the PLO and Jordan during the Black September, or opening contact channels between the PLO and the US administration in late 70s and 80s. In addition to that, they had charitable contributions where they provided support for some socio-economic activities in the occupied territories, especially these assistants were institutionalized by the establishment of the Welfare Association in Geneva. But what do we mean by the Palestinian capitalists? This is a very complex group that can be divided into different groups. The first one is the returnee capitalists, which is comprised of the Palestinian bourgeois that had emerged in the 80s, but also some of them grew in the Arab Gulf countries and in Europe, Western Europe and in Northern America, and these are the strongest supporters of the Oslo. The second group is the local capitalists, and these are comprised of two main subgroups. The large one are the large land owners who are historically enjoyed considerable political and social influence. They were close to the Jordanian regime, but they lost their influence with the surgence of the Palestinian nationalism. The third one is the new rich group who played sub-bidders for the Israeli occupation since 1967. And we should take, and this group has contributed as mediators in establishing, forming a strata or a class, even within the Israeli society, by forming companies and firms to be promoted in the occupied territories. There is an Israeli class that is beneficiary of investment in the Palestinian territory. And later on, we'll see that this class was pressuring the Israeli leadership since Oslo Accords to, as one of you said, so that the idea concept of the Palestinian statehood to turn from a direct colonialism into a neo-colonialism so that the Israeli economic control is sustained. The third one is the new rich, and these one who developed or gained their wealth recently just with Oslo process. And this one is a complex one. This includes politicians who combined with security and other politicians. And there are other groups such as in Hebron, we see after Oslo, when imports from China were allowed, they went to import from China, so they collected or gained wealth. And so in a way or the other, they contributed to destroying the national industries that existed in Hebron before. Now, what is the influence of these people in the policy making? The returnees were among the arch supporters of the Oslo and peace accords to build a Palestinian state, considering that this state might provide security that they lost in order to have investments within the Palestinian territories. Especially that during the Oslo times, the logic of Oslo is the peace dividends, and they promoted the illusion that the West Bank, if it goes on that track, will be turned into the Middle East, Hong Kong, or Singapore. And this goes in line with the vision of Shimon Peres, that is a new Middle East, which has to do with the U.S. hegemony and after the collapse of the USSR. So Mr. Peres wanted to establish a new Middle East that is built on economic cooperation, where Israel is the core of that. There's another point that I would like to draw attention to, which is rarely discussed, which is the Israeli economic incentive to sign Oslo Accords, which is a direct result of the Israeli economic restructure or reforms in 1985, a matter that required to have a political stability in the region in order to attract foreign investments and to start or to embark on realizing the new Middle East. Following the Oslo Accord, early signs of the capitalist influence is seen in the Article 21 of the Palestinian Basic Law that directly states that the Palestinian economic system is based on the principles of free market, meaning that a clear adoption to the new liberalism. And this is, if compared with the Western constitutions, including that of the United States of America, which is the main hub of free market, they avoid using free market or neoliberalism. I'm sure there are indications here or there, but the market is flexible enough to adopt a change to the economic policies based on the change on the ground. So, adopting the free market from the start, a matter had led to creating the legal framework allowing the capitalists to manipulate the policies to serve their immediate individual interests. In addition, the new liberalism adopted from the start, as our colleague said in 1993, in a report by the World Bank, that gave a future vision, even before the establishment of the PA, a vision for the Palestinian future market. We see this is coupled with the political oppression and the corruption and also the colonialism that was established, colonialism, which is called the crony capitalism, that continue to exist in the different Arab countries and developing countries. We see the cronyism, how it existed in the PA with the establishment of relations with the influential businessmen, security officials, and politicians, a matter that resulted in bad ramifications on the Palestinian economy. And we mean that this contradicts with the principles of free market that calls for opening the markets for competition, where the authority and wealth is concentrated within among the few people who control the policies for their interests. And with this political, economic grouping or groups has resulted into getting the politicians wealthier and wealthier. In the 1990s, the special relation between some Palestinian businessmen and politicians resulted in concentrating the authority in the hands of a number of a small group that manipulated with politics for their own interests. This was the same case with the collusion of the political and security officials to run the monopolies in the public businesses. These included many basic issues. Statistics indicate to around more than 25 key imported commodities. This includes sugar, frozen meats, cigarettes, live animals, and others. These monopolies were not only an early sign of the PA corruption, but also the most obvious expression of the emergent political economic alliance that found the PA an effective political mechanism for achieving private economic interests. Furthermore, monopolies were also selectively granted to those Palestinian achieving private economic interests. Palestinian political economic actors that enjoyed special proximity to Israeli companies. And if we look at the economic studies, this has had devastating impact on the Palestinian economy. The Palestinian startups and budding economies were destroyed, companies, and greater benefits were gained by the Israeli economy. Also, these Palestinian businessmen or capitalists benefited as they got some privilege, the VIP passes, free movement, permits, and so forth. But we noticed that recently their impact has increased on their impact on the PA was increased during the policies adopted by Mr. Salam Fayyad in the year 2008. As we noticed, different governments formed by Salam Fayyad included capitalists or some technocrats who support the neoliberalism. Especially during the Fayyadism or the third way, there was a positive interaction with the Israeli or Netanyahu project, that is economic peace, where the two sides they shunned politics and focus more in economy and economic cooperation, activating the private sector, and imposed an economic stability to attract investments. And as you know, this does not mean peace, but it means, in the Palestinian case, imposing a strong security hold on the territories. In addition of the policies adopted, that is the banking reform during Fayyad governance, as an important aspect of rising capitalist political influence. These governments signed long-term reforms contracts of $4.2 billion. These are according to Marsad Center, $4.2 billion in 2013, which makes around 40% of the GDP, with annual interest running at $200 million, in addition to $1 million in fines for delays. And if the situation continues, that is a public debt for the coming 5 years, then will be 100% of the GDP in debt. A catastrophic impact. We don't know how the PA can pay off its debts, or no one knows how these debts are spent. The political analysis here, that how the debts increase and increase the political impact on the authority, that capitalists can pressure the authority to change its policies to serve their own interests when they threaten to withdraw some investments or to hold back others. And as we know, the people pay for that cost, as we remember in 2012, the high prices, and which led for the first time to demonstrations against the economic policies of the government. And a third manifestation or impact in 2012 in the Aqaba Economic Forum, there was a strong presence for these capitalist groups. We heard about the breaking the silence, breaking the impasse as an initiative to revive the peace process. And we know that the capitalists were aware of the Kerry's plan away from the politicians and representatives of the Palestinian civil society. So if this is true, then this suggests that the Palestinian local capitalists are the first future or the first recipients of the international peace initiatives. And it will be difficult to believe that any such peace initiatives will manage to contribute to achieving the Palestinian full rights. Second, the third one is the social control, which is done through different mechanisms, such as infiltrating the Palestinian society by establishing larger NGOs with foreign funding and international interference to infiltrate through the Palestinian national fabric, and to have some social activities, such as through capacity building for these organizations, where they trickle down into the smaller organizations so that they become more professional and adopt the same criteria adopted or required by the donors. Next, also the issue of lending. We go back to the issue of lending. Lending has gone down to dangerous parameters, where it led people to more, or led to a debt trap. The Palestinian Authority had a debt of $494 million 2009 compared to $1 billion 2013, which means that 94,000 people of the Palestinian employees out of 153,000 are in debt. As we know that these are used for mortgage, cars, marriage costs, electric appliances, and are rarely invested in productive activities. These personal or individual debts has dangerous political and social ramifications, including individualism, and drives personal private concerns, systematically pushing people to abandon crucial national issues. It also fosters, as you know, political apathy and undermines critical thinking and action against oppressive systems. Another way, that is by using laborers or workers in factories. As you know, many Palestinian factories, the laborers are abused in a systematic way, so much that the minimum wage law of 1,450 shekels. Many researchers, they believe that it should be more than 2,400 shekels. But after interviewing some laborers, they still take 800 shekels and 1,000 shekels, and as they don't have any other alternatives, otherwise they will be thrown to the streets. Also, this abuse might go institutionalized if the industrial parks or industrial zones are established. These in these industrial zones, the Palestinian laws or Israeli laws, labor laws, will not be applied as related to the minimum wage, and there will not be they will not enjoy the right to unions, and even the existing unions will not be allowed to represent these laborers. We see that even unions, even if they represent them, you know the situation of the miserable situation of these unions that were weakened during the last 20 years of Oslo life. The third thing is the directly dealing with the Israeli occupation and economic occupation, which is normalizing the occupation the economic way. And this has recently been practiced widely through the industrial zones, through the Israeli-Palestinian forums and the Palestinian working in Israeli settlements, and this is the peak of normalization throughout the Palestinian history of its cause history. Also, we know there are campaigns by the divestment and boycott against some of names of these influentials for being into these normalization activities, and we know that these joint activities are being promoted as projects for development, and here they are faking the Palestinian awareness that through profitability, for profitability reasons, even if this means dealing with the occupation, then they consider it as a national project. And I interviewed some Palestinians, and they still consider this as a national activity, while even knowing that this deals with means dealing with the Israeli occupation. And we know that this Israeli prosperity is for some people. Of the economic activities, joint activities, Palestinian and Israeli, one of them is the Rawabi city. It's one of the greatest or biggest projects in the region, and there are many issues in Rawabi, such as them accepting 3,000 trees donated by the Jewish National Fund that were planted but later on uprooted due to criticism. And also they contracted over 10 Israeli companies in providing as suppliers for Rawabi. And Rawabi people or officials, they said Israeli suppliers do not contribute to building settlements, but they recognized having Israeli companies on their suppliers list. But this is normalization. Normalization is normalization, regardless if these companies contribute to settlement building or not. The second example is the industrial zones, which they apply as qualifying industrial zones, QIZ, which was applied in Jordan and Egypt. And this is the manifestation of Shimon Peres' vision for a new Middle East. This industrial zone is a major problem because it brings together the Palestinian, Israeli, and regional capital in abusing cheap labor force. Although this brings benefit for a small number of Palestinian capitals, but also it consolidates the Israeli occupation, especially knowing that most of the products are there to be exported and not for local consumption. A third form of economic normalization are the Palestinian investments in Israel and the settlements. There was an MA thesis at Al-Quds University that said there are Palestinian investments in Israel and Israeli settlements. The amounts were about $3 to $5 billion. And only $1.5 billion are invested in the West Bank compared. And this study was criticized by many people. Some of them accused it with problems in its approach and the credibility. But we need to take into consideration, yes, there are Palestinian investments in Israel and the Israeli settlements. And I got testimonies of some influentials at the Ministry of Economy that if you go to industrial zones such as Burkan and Ma'al Adumim, yes, there are Palestinian investments there. Another study that many Palestinian companies, they promote Israeli products, especially in Jordan Valley area, take the Majul dates that is produced or taken from packaging centers as these Israeli dates are brought and repacked as to look as a Palestinian product and sold as a Palestinian one to avoid boycott. Also contracting Israeli security companies. Some reports revealed that many Palestinian companies appear on at Nitac's client list, which is owned by Mr. Danny Rothschild, who led the Israeli occupation forces in the West Bank and South Lebanon, and he was an Israeli intelligence officer. And there is a partnership also in the tech ventures. And this was reported in different studies. And there is a model here in Ramallah, the Sadara project. If you go to the website, it clearly says that it was founded by an Israeli and Palestinian, Saeed Nashif and Yadin Hoffman, and it's led by an Israeli Palestinian team in technology. Another report, if you follow the Forbes, they focus on the Israeli Cisco company for bringing Israeli high-tech officials or experts and Palestinian businessmen to build on the Israeli startup nation. That many Palestinian youths who are university graduates in technology and IT, they get into this normalization with Israel. Especially there are secret or undercover centers that are not accessible to everyone near the Dead Sea area. This is my paper in general. I would like to state that the track that the Palestinian capital is going is not checked, is not controlled, and has dangerous ramification at the political, social, and economic aspects. And I hope that everyone is aware of these ramifications, but I hope that there will be some wake up to deter this capital because it is consolidating this colonialism. Thank you. Thank you, Tariq, for getting to all these details.
This paper requires several workshops in order to discuss the impact of such investments, especially that they are exploiting fresh graduates and they use them and convince them that they are serving their nation. As I said, a year ago we received details of names and pictures in small halls. They bring in Israeli lecturers specialized in IT, and the meetings, the interviews with these young people is why not we are benefiting. And we were explaining that this was normalization and exploitation of our young people, but there was no awareness of this. This is a very important point to consider in order probably to, and we're sure that Omar will talk about this. Our second intervention will be with Mr. Omar Barghouti. He is a Palestinian researcher and activist, founding member of the Palestinian Boycott and Divestment Campaign, BTS, against Israel. The intervention is normalization, an effective Israeli arm in facing the BDS.
Well, according to lexicon, meaning lexicon in Arabic, there are many meanings for normalize. The most related to our topic today is normalizing the horse, is to teach the horse how to be led and to be tamed. So the normalization is to tame someone or something to behave in contrary to his nature. The worst is what was spread during the Oslo stage. In order for this normalization to be convincing and active, it should gather both principality and sensitivity, and to avoid dogmatism. So the the Arab normalization in general, Palestinian in general, and in particular with Israel as a racist colonial entity and its institutions is considered one of the main strategic elements, Israeli and Zionist elements, to colonize our minds after they have succeeded in colonizing our land and our culture. So the normalization increased after the Oslo, but the roots go back to 1948. In his important article, The Iron Wall, in 1923, the Zionist right-wing leader Jabotinsky said that the Jewish colonization of Israel, and this is what they called it, they said colonization in the old days, very frankly, and they said that this colonization cannot be established without a voluntary agreement with the cannot be established with through a voluntary agreement with the indigenous people. The Arab people, Arab people of Palestine, cannot accept this. So, in this regard, he said, you cannot change the nature of the people. This is the quote unquote. End of quote. And therefore, the solution of this dilemma for Jabotinsky is to build an psychological iron wall using the huge and systematic force against Arabs so that they will lose any hope in achieving history against the colonization and to accept or surrender to the eternity of having colonizers in Palestine. And then negotiations can go with the Arabs based on reconciliation that will be based on facts, not rights. Facts and rights are two Arabic words that are related to each other. So, so far, the iron wall continued as it is. Now it is a cement, concrete wall, and it has remained part of the Zionist ideology in order to continue colonizing our minds and to iron our consciences. And to steal our rights and to have us accept it not just a destiny but as a natural thing. The most important objectives of this normalization wall is to reduce the ceiling of our expectations and to accept the enemy plans. And this is and not to further different between and Israel followed the gradual normalization as it, or rather gradual massacres as it happened in Gaza. Now, after years of colonizing the minds successfully, some Palestinian officials have started to talk frankly that negotiations is the only strategy to achieve our rights, ignoring the fact what is called negotiations with the state of occupation under these circumstances is no more than negation, gradual negation of the Palestinian rights and an attempt to legitimize that by giving a formal Palestinian Arab formal nature for it. These are not real negotiations because slaves don't negotiate with the masters either to beg or to resist. And two, the serious negotiations and similar colonization cases was only part of a strategy as a culmination of the adaptation or the modification, the balance of forces in various through various resistance in order to force the enemy to surrender and accept the rights of people under colonialism. So you can imagine how the situation is when we have this colonial settlement, substitutive kind of occupation. So normalization in the meaning of subjugation, Israeli subjugation of a group of our people. This has gone too far to a degree that this group that is small in number, has been addictive to the economic. Now, the interests of some capitalists, as my colleague Tariq said, the interests have matched with the interests of the occupation, and they have started to deal with the enemy as a normal party and deal with Israel as a friendly state that has some problems with the normalization of some Palestinian officials succeeded in making them moderate and who were making Oslo as sacrosanct and also respecting the security coordination and evading the accession to the Rome Statute in order to bring the criminal wars, Israeli criminal wars, to trial. So there's an important saying that we don't want enemies to Israel has become يا أخي خذ لك نفس. This normalization of the Palestinian official mentality and defending the interests of this narrow economic sector, all led to diminishing or reducing the gradual reduction of the goals of the Palestinian national struggle as were expressed by the PLO leadership since it was established in 1964 and the launching of the Palestinian Revolution in 1965. And the recent statements that there is no willing of dumping Israel with millions of refugees, and some even they are ready to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Any time of national desertification, it is easy to lose hope that we will not be able to face the desert and its winds. But if you understand that one of the elements of strategy that is dividing the problems and looking at the parts that we can do something practical for solving it, then our national and ethical duty forces us to create oases, fertile oases in our work and in our systematic plan that is based on realism and ambition. So instead of trying to defeat the desert as a whole, when these oases increase and they start to networking with each other, then they will create a qualitative, new collective situation that can be able to defeat the desert at the beginning and then to green the land that were swallowed by the land. One of these oases is the BDS or boycott that has become an international phenomenon. The call for BDS that was issued by the greatest majority of the Palestinian society in 2005 has paid the floor for overcoming the desert of the Palestinian policy, official policy, and despite the strength of Israel and its imposition of hegemony on the Israeli decision and being immune on the European level and the weakness of the Palestinian leadership, Israel is feeling that it is threatened as never before as a result of the BDS, but part of this threat is the BDS that is based on the international level and stems its rights from the human rights. In 2013, the Israeli government decided that the BDS is a strategic threat to the Israeli system altogether. And in this light, the Israeli government moved the responsibility of fighting the BDS from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to the Ministry of Strategic Affairs. The BDS call defined three conditions that are the minimum for the Palestinian people to practice their self-determination, which is an inalienable right, ending the occupation of the Arab land occupied in 1967, ending the apartheid system regime that is existing in 1948 area, and the right of return for the refugees, which is the most important, which is the right of 68% of the Palestinians, a high percent of the people in exile and people the internally displaced in Israel. So we cannot minimize the rights of the Palestinian people by just the right of people in 1967 and many people say that ending the occupation as if it comes to an end, all the Palestinian brings to an end to the Palestinian right, but they forget that 38% of our people live in the occupied territories. So based on the history of the Palestinian people that is rich of peaceful and popular result struggle, and based on the boycott and that was impacted by the struggle in South Africa and the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King has achieved. The boycott movement as a human rights movement that adopts peaceful struggle and rejects all forms of racist and even racist against Jews. And this is very important. So this means that we differentiate between Jewishness and Zionism. Therefore, the success of the boycott movement since it was established 9 years and its recent achievements indicates to a new phase in which Israel may face an international isolation, unprecedented isolation, and therefore the BDS should be a main element of the Palestinian struggle strategy for our full rights. The Israeli fear from the BDS shows the noticeable development in the procedures of boycott as like the big pension funds in Europe and companies and banks. Were taken against companies and banks in Europe, like the Bill Gates fund. They withdrew all their investments of $182 million from the G4S company, security company, because it is violating human rights and investing in settlements. The same thing was done by the United Methodist Church as well as the Presbyterian Church in the U.S. They withdrew their investment from HP and Caterpillar and Motorola because they contributed to the occupation. And few days ago, the BDS has achieved qualitative achieve in Kuwait as the Kuwait municipality exempted Viola, French company, from a contract of 750 million because this company took part in the light trail in Jerusalem. After we have appealed to them and to the Kuwaiti government a few months ago. Veolia also withdrew from another Kuwaiti contract with $1.5 billion. So the total loss of contracts for Veolia was 26. The total was, since we started the boycott against it in 2008, reached $26 billion. This Veolia loss. There are other qualitative achievements in the economic, cultural, and academic fields that we don't have time to elaborate. As a result of the growth of BDS and the extremism of the right wing in Israel as never before, the popularity of Israel among the peoples or nations of the world was reduced to the level as never before, and now it has become the third or fourth worst country in the world. And according to GlobeScan, that is done by BBC every year. Normalization as a fig leaf and its impact on the national struggle. The National Committee for Boycotting Israel takes the definition of normalization that was taken in 2007 in Ramallah, in which representatives, all political forces took part, and mainly representatives of Fatah and all union and popular unions. And the most important this definition is that the relation between a Palestinian and Arab party with an Israeli party should have two important conditions so that there will not be normalization. First, that the Israeli party should recognize the basic rights of our people according to the international law, all our rights, including the right of return. and then this relation should be a form of joint struggle against the occupation, apartheid, and the Israeli colonization. The normalization is considered one of the most important impediments against the normalization. And regardless of the intentions, the attempt of some people to penetrate in the Israeli society through meetings and normalizing projects only led to undermining our national values and ethical values and providing the fig leaf to cover the Israeli colonization. If these if the standards of boycott are agreed upon through societal large discussion, the task is to protect this collective terms of reference. Otherwise, we have never seen in history that a colonizing society that is extremely racist would cede its voluntarily its suppression to the suppressed people. Our struggle, popular struggle, the official normalization that was mentioned, it's important to be mentioned, and it includes the security coordination, and this is the most dangerous kinds of normalization, official meetings with the Zionist lobbying groups and parties and their representatives. We have to differentiate between these meetings and negotiations, because the negotiations with the enemy, it's not normalization. These are normalizing with the Israeli parties, and this is normalization. This doesn't contribute to changing at all the Israeli position in favor of our national rights. On the contrary, they contribute to the intransigence of the Israeli position. The negative impact of these meetings is of this normalization is extended to the Arab dimension, giving justifications for some Arab countries and activities to normalize with the state of occupation. So some Gulf countries now normalize security, they coordinate security with Israel, some of them by Israeli arms. And the normalization is extending in tourist, cultural, and academic, agricultural areas in many countries, including Jordan and Morocco. I'm not going to talk about the economic, because economic normalization, but the academic and cultural. Um, uh, the the um, the statement for boycotting Israel. That's in many, well, often this normalization is the result of giving prominence to the individual narrow interests. Among the most important academic normalization, I can mention two. In 2005, amidst the boycott by the academics union in Britain, the president of Al Quds University went to London and signed an agreement with the president of the Hebrew University before the media in London, and this was the strongest to undermine boycott, and therefore the academics union in Britain retreated from boycotting the Israeli universities. And there is also the historic narrative, which is a project that was provided or funded by the American government in order to teach our Palestinian children the Zionist narrative of the situation. So bringing an academic Israeli academic or allowing a Palestinian academic and artist to go and do activity in Tel Aviv, and then to bring an Israeli one in Bethlehem or Ramallah. This pretense of equality between the suppressor and the suppressed can only be a kind of complicity. There's the student normalization, Seeds of Peace, and other projects that are well funded in order to pollute our youth and have them normalized with Israeli parties. The Willy Brandt Willy Brandt, which belongs to a German party, is active among you and Euromed as well, and what is called the Peace Alliance, and the German and French activities. There is an intelligent normalization that try to bypass the standards for boycott. We have to remind the French and the German that the Holocaust is a crime, European crime. It has, we have nothing to deal with it as Arab nation with it. So therefore, we are not forced to reduce their feeling of guilt on our expense, the expense of our rights. The normalization in 1948 as a result of there are different standards in the areas of 1948 for this normalization. We differentiate between the daily normal relations between the Palestinians in 1948 and the Israelis in daily, and this cannot be considered as normalization. Joint struggle with forces against Zionism cannot be considered a normalization. And disclosing a joint, and then the cultural activities against the Zionist movement is also among these normalization activities is representing Israel on regional and international forum joint. And taking part in Israeli delegations. And then finally, the Israeli-Arab conflict and Palestinian-Zionist conflict is not an identical conflict on two equal parties, so that the treatment will be done through dialogue and coexistence and overcoming hatred and reaching a middle grounds, as is sometimes depicted in Western media. The struggle is between indigenous people and the colonialism, settlement. Now, at the end, there is, despite the fact that there are tamed horses in our country, still the other horses are still strong and insisting to get their rights and to live in equality with all people. The best to face these people who are normalizing is the dignity and insisting on dignity.
Certainly, after we have a last presentation, we will have a lot of discussion about normalization. Mandy Turner is the director of the she focuses in her research on the peace building and conflict, especially in the Palestinian occupied territory. Her intervention is peace building as counterinsurgency.
Is this working? No? Is this one? Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank Muwatin for the invitation to speak here today. It's a very great privilege to be here with you all, particularly in that I don't normally speak here in the occupied Palestinian territory. It's also really wonderful to be involved in a conference with so many people whose work I admire and whose friendship I really value. So thank you for the invitation. Secondly, I want to apologise for speaking in English, but my Arabic is very, very poor. Some English friends say that my English is worse because I'm Scottish, but there you go. We have to do what we do. My third comment is I feel a little bit embarrassed to be presenting this work to you today because my research is not directed at Palestinians. It's directed at a Western audience. To those who actually believe the propaganda about this place, that they believe that there's a peace being built, they believe that it's a complex story, they believe that there's two sides to every story. So my research and writing is directed at these people. These are often the same people who hide behind the platitudes about the need to remain academically neutral. I don't hide behind that platitude. So I apologise in advance if what I say today is very obvious to you. However, I hope that you'll find that despite the empirical evidence I use, which is really familiar to you all because you live and breathe it every day. The conceptual framework is not. So what I'm proposing here is a new conceptual framework, a paradigm shift for how we understand peace building in the OPT. So I hope you'll really slightly indulge me. We had some criticisms earlier about academics being a bit too abstract and not practical enough. But I would argue that we really need to understand and conceptualize the reality in order to be able to change it. So please indulge me a little bit. So Western peacebuilding has been extremely and extensively criticized in the literature. One of the main criticisms has been that there's a contradiction between building Palestinian institutions, governance structures, and economic development in preparation for sovereignty in the context of Israel's occupation and colonization. Western peacebuilding has also been accused of not, in fact, delivering peace. Now, up until January of last year, I was writing pieces which argued this. However, I'm no longer convinced that there's a contradiction, and I explain why in a paper that was published by the Review of International Studies earlier this year. And I'm happy to send anybody a copy who asks me for it. So my argument is that Western donor-led peacebuilding should be understood as a form of counterinsurgency whose goal is to secure a population. If we understand it in that way, then the contradictions vanish, and we see that peacebuilding has not actually failed. In fact, quite the contrary, it has largely succeeded. There is a peace, a very violent colonial peace, which is why the quotation from Mahmoud Darwish that you see on the screen here seems very apt to me. Darwish, of course, is referring to the siege of the Second Intifada, but I am suggesting that Western peacebuilding is a form of siege also. It's an onslaught of activities to get you to choose a harmless slavery. As Omar suggested, and I love this phrase, to teach the horse how to be led. So I argue that explicitly relabeling peacebuilding as counterinsurgency in the OPT provides us with a deep sociological grammar to comprehend policies and processes that on first glance appear contradictory when viewed through the self-proclaimed benign peacebuilding lens, but they are not contradictory when we look at them through the lens of counterinsurgency, which unashamedly focuses on stabilization. So if we redirect our attention away from the rhetoric, away from the continual hum of the happy and busy peacebuilder, and ask the question, okay, so why are you building institutions? Why are you trying to develop the OPT economy? The answer lies not in supporting the Palestinian people in their struggle for self-determination. The answer, I would argue, lies in stabilization. Money and effort is